Welcome to the Western Bell podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled In Relationship. The talk was given by Myosho Ginny Matthews on April 26, 2025 via Zoom. Ginny was a 40-year student of Joshu Sasaki Roshi when he died at the age of 107. She took lay ordination in 2000, leads retreats on practice, is a dance teacher and choreographer, and is featured in the book The Unknown She, 8 Faces of an Emerging Consciousness. In this talk, she says that practice is to make relationship with whatever is in our world, with the reality of the moment. Ginny speaks about her experience as a Western woman practicing Japanese Zen as a mother and in relationship with her family, teacher, and sangha. She talks about the use of koans, enigmatic questions used in Rinzai Zen Buddhism to open to a state beyond the fixated self. She reads some of the teachings that Sasaki Roshi gave at the Bodhimanda Center, describes practice at the Mount Baldy Center, and discusses the value she received from sweat lodge practice, from contact with Siddha Yoga, and from the perspectives of Matthew Fox and Brother David Steindl-Rast in the Christian tradition. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Ginny Matthews.
I have 3 grown sons, 4 grandchildren, and 3 step-grandchildren. And I've been in a partnership with my husband for 59 years. So relationship has been huge in my life. Though, of course, the word relationship has many meanings. So it's been 10 years since my teacher, Sasaki Roshi, died. And it's an ongoing relationship with my teacher and with the teachings. And I wanted to articulate what those teachings are for me, in my experience, and share them. Because Sasaki Roshi did not leave a successor. So there is not one lineage holder who's carrying on the teachings. It's in his sangha, his ordained, his older students, the Oshos who are the teachers. So it feels like a calling to bring his teachings out into the world in whatever form, many forms. You may have read short excerpts from some quotes that I have of Sasaki Roshi. He mostly gave what he called teishos, and there is a book called Manifesting Zen, which is a collection of 35 of his teishos in 1985. And a teisho is a commentary on a koan, and it's unprepared. The teacher is responding immediately in the moment to what is arising and giving his talk, so to speak. And I always thought Sasaki Roshi was particularly gifted in teisho. I always likened him to a jazz musician because the theme was the koan. The famous one is, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And the answer is moo, which doesn't necessarily mean no. Basically, it means non-existence. And that would be the theme. And then he would be off and running. And he would go all over the place. And then at exactly an hour later, he would bring himself back to the theme and the teisho. And I just thought he was very brilliant at that. But these quotes, little excerpts, actually came from a question and answer period at the Bodhimanda Zen Center with a group of people. And it has a very different quality, and I find them very helpful. And they focus on relationship. So the first quote is, the human world is a feeling affair, but there must also be consciousness in our feeling. Where our feelings are blind, that is emotionality and just confusion. Where our feelings are conscious, that is clarity and leads us to real relationship. So we should develop clarity in our lives through the exercise of consciousness and full feeling. Then we will see that there are occasions where tears are appropriate, and there are occasions where laughter is appropriate. And in any case, relationship is appropriate. And the Roshi talked about that. Existence is relationship. Existence is meeting what arises in the moment with full feeling and consciousness. What is arising in the moment is what is sometimes called dependent co-origination. That means your consciousness is arising with all consciousness at the same time and is also disappearing, arising and disappearing, arising and disappearing. Expansion, contraction, yang, yin, mu, u, all those supposed polarities, or at least we put them into a polarity. So, how do we develop consciousness and full feeling? How do we meet with immediacy the arising moment? So that he would say true love or true relationship can take place. So, as we all know, that if we are lost in our thoughts, in our worries, in our thinking of the future, we are not present. So, when we're meeting someone and we have this inner dialogue interfering, then true relationship cannot really happen. So, the practices of Zen, I love so much about it because I'm a dancer. And I've been for 52 years. And I know that I can't do triple turns if I don't practice. So when I encountered a spirituality that called itself spiritual practice, that made so much sense to me. It was a modality that really worked for me. So what are the tools to live in true immediacy and true relationship? So, of course, the foundation of Zen is the translation of the word chan, which is a translation of the Sanskrit dhyana, which means meditation. It's focus, concentration. Dogen called it self-inquiry. So Zazen is a physicality, and I did talk on the physicality of meditation in one of my talks here. It is an opportunity to let go of action, having to respond to the world. You simply take the posture and breathe and meet what's arising in that moment. And gives you great opportunities to meet what is arising in the moment. There are two branches of Zen, Rinzai and Soto, and I'm the Rinzai branch. They were 7-day meditation retreats. My first one, the whole session, or maybe 3 or 4 days, every single Bob Dylan song went through my head. That was what was arising. It almost felt like I was flushing. So much can arise, and your instruction is to return to your breath or your koan, which I'm going to talk about later. So there you are in the posture, and other things, restlessness arises, painful knees and back arise, all the things you rather be doing, hunger arises, sleepiness, because these retreats are meant to push your boundaries. So you don't get much sleep and you eat at very specific times. For me as a vegetarian, it was fine, but for some of the guys, they had trouble with vegetarian meals. So you're not picking and choosing. That was a famous phrase from the third patriarch of China. The way is simple, just refrain from picking and choosing. So here we are sitting in Zazen, basically most of the day, and unable to pick and choose. We're responding to the bell. When the bell rings, you're allowed to get up and go do your walking meditation, go to the bathroom, and then you have to sit and back and forth and back and forth. So Zazen is really a valuable way to meet yourself in your silent and non-moving state. We also did chanting, and chanting is the way to develop the breath and the hara. When I was talking about the physicality of Zen and Zazen, we talked about the hara, the abdominal area, breathing from the hara. And the chanting, the way we do the chanting is to develop your ability to drop your mind in your hara, to breathe from there and to produce sound. So that's chanting practice, which we did twice a day for an hour. And it's also a reminder that the hara is so important because it is your center of gravity. Your connection to the earth is in your hara, 2 inches below your navel. And Roshi would use that idea of the hara. Once you kind of found it in our personal interviews, he would say, we are meeting navel to navel. Or he would say, you need to throw your navel to that tree or to that rock so that you were making relationship from a really primordial place, not the thinking mind up there. The other part of Zen training, so we've got Zazen, we've got the chanting, is called samu, which is work practice. And the Roshi said, you must learn to completely dissolve into whatever you're doing at that time in work practice. And we keep it very simple because it's much harder to dissolve into the complexity of the work that we mostly do in the world, like shopping and going to the bank and all our tasks in the world. So at the center, during retreat, our tasks are sweeping the walk, raking the path, chopping the vegetables, stirring the soup, sewing your robes if it come apart. And you have that ability to dissolve into that action. You don't have to think about it. No one's making demands on you. Your children are not interrupting you as you're trying to cook a meal. You are able to put what we call one-pointed attention. And it's a training device. I didn't quite get it. I thought, well, can I just make all my work like this? No, the idea is you train yourself in the simplicity of these tasks so that when you go out to the world in more complexity, you can bring the training. It's a training. And when you sweep and meet that action and allow your discursive mind to quiet down, you are truly making a relationship with the broom, with the sound of the leaves or whatever you're sweeping. You become fully present. So samu is great practice. So I wanted to share about my Dharma brother, Jamal, who had difficulty with the sitting practice. I think people who have been through a lot of trauma, he's an African-American man who had a very, very difficult childhood and adulthood. And so sitting still with your mind, there's a lot more arising. So he had difficulty with Zazen. But he found that in samu, in the simple tasks of samu, he could truly dissolve himself and become one with that. So he was our caretaker for about a year at the Zen Center where he really practiced this. So now he's driving a bus, complex relationships happening all the time. But what he was realizing is that he could bring that quality of samu. So he said, when I would see an older person who was clearly not very mobile, I would make sure that I pulled up the bus right exactly in front of them so that that person didn't have to walk. So he was making a relationship with this person or with this infirmity. And if they had a cane or a walker, he would kneel the bus, which you usually only do when you have a wheelchair. But he always felt, well, why would we make somebody with a cane step up? I'm going to kneel the bus. And he said that was a great training, that he was there. He wasn't thinking about, oh, I'm late for my next stop, I better hurry. No, he was present as he pulled up to the stop to see what was needed, what was called for in that situation. I thought that was a great way to practice samu. What is called for in that situation? So before I come back to Roshi's teachings around koan practice, I wanted to share some other points of view. I'm not sure when it was, but at one point, I was feeling a little frustrated with the fact that my spiritual practice was not native to where I lived. It came from Japan and it had a lot of baggage. I mean, most spiritual practices probably do, but Japanese Zen for a Western woman has a lot of baggage. So there was some frustration there. And I started looking around. I met Guru Mai from City Yoga. Here we are, always in black and austere, and everyone who shows up at Guru Mai, they're just makeup and beautifully dressed and flowers in their hair. And very feminine, let's put it that way, very feminine. And I really needed to find my feminine. The other point, though, was here, Turtle Island, as the indigenous people call it. And I was very fortunate that in my little community here of Sebastopol, California, there was a Lakota Sioux medicine woman holding sweat lodge, Bear Eagle Bear. And so I started doing sweat lodge practice with her, which felt so good to be praying, making relationship with this land through these sweat lodge practices. And I was reading a collection of talks from different spiritual teachers, and one is Matthew Fox. He was a Catholic priest, Matthew Fox, but he was kind of kicked out, or he withdrew, and he's now Episcopal priest. And he encountered sweat lodge practice and had that same kind of response. I think it was a nun in his order, the Catholic order, who was an indigenous woman. And she started sweat lodge practice at this college called Holy Names College. So I wanted to read what he says about this because it is very much in our theme of relationship. One way I pray is with Native American prayers. It's one of the most grounding and the most radical of all forms of prayer I've used. It has been the way of praying for thousands of years, and we ought to avail ourselves of such wisdom. I do a Native American sweat, and when I leave, I always say Aho Mitakuye, which means to all my relations. Native Americans constantly celebrate all their relations, which means relations to the earth, to the rocks, to the birds, the trees, the clouds, to all people of all races and all religions, and of course to divinity and to the spirits. But in our anthropocentric culture, we hear the word relation and tend to think of relatives or lovers or other relationships with two-legged creatures. But the true mystical tradition says that our relations come out of the womb that birthed us all, the cosmic womb of God. We can return to this womb, which is what happens in a sweat lodge. People come out of this experience of darkness and emptiness into creativity, or what we would say manifestation. So the sweat lodge practice is a beautiful experience of going into what they think of as the womb of the earth. It's dark and warm or hot. And we pray there. And we make relationship with each rock that comes in. The rocks come in separately. They're called the stone people. And we make a relationship with the stone people and with the fire. outside. So the practice is to constantly make relationship with what is in your world. And it's true that when we think of the word relationship, we don't think of our relationship with the natural world. Through sweat lodge practice and using that prayer, I always end any of my contemplations or prayers with Omi Takuyasen to all my relations. And it has really informed the way I move through the world so that I'm always including the trees and the birds and the clouds in what is arising in the moment and acknowledging that, even if it's just for a second. And if I'm not acknowledging it, I know I'm caught. If I'm not hearing the birds singing, if I'm not seeing the trees or the flowers as I do my walk, I know I'm caught in my discursive thinking, which is very natural. It's human. But then I remember I really want to be present because being present means to be in true relationship, which is love. That is what love is. I think some Zen master was told, well, what is the true Buddhist teaching? And he said, attention. And he said, well, there must be more. Yeah, I mean, it's a long teaching here, a big teaching. Oh, yes, there's more. Attention, attention. And the monk is not giving up. And he says, attention, attention, attention. Because if you're not present, then you're not in true relationship. And that was my teacher's work with us, was how do we learn to be truly present and attentive? And we're going to move into that. And then a dear favorite of mine, David Stendal-Ross, who is a Christian monk, he uses the term wakefulness, which is the same thing, awareness, presence, attention, however you want to put it. And I really love what he says about this. So I'm just going to read that too. So he's done this exposition about his relationship with God. So that is why wakefulness is so preeminent a task. How can I give a full response to this present moment unless I am alert to its message? And how could I be alert unless all my senses are wide awake? God's inexhaustible poetry comes to me in 5 languages: sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. All the rest is interpretation, literary criticism, as it were, not the poetry itself, because poetry resists translation. It can be fully experienced only in its original language. All the more true of divine poetry of sensuousness. How then can I make sense of life if not through my senses? When and do what do our senses respond most readily? If I ask myself this question, I think immediately of working in my small garden. For fragrance, I grow jasmine, pineapple, mint, sage, thyme, and 8 kinds of lavender. What an abundance of delightful smells on so small a patch of ground. And what a variety of sounds: spring rain, autumn wind, year-round birds, mourning dove, blue jay, and wren. The hawk's sharp cry at noon and the owl's hooting at nightfall. The sound the broom makes on gravel, wind chimes, and the creaking garden gate. Who could translate the taste of a strawberry or fig into words? What an infinite array of things to touch, from the wet grass under my bare feet in the morning to the sun-warm boulders against which I lean when the evening turns cool. My eyes go back and forth between the near and the far, the golden green metallic beetle lost among rose petals, the immense expanse of the Pacific Ocean rising from below the cliff to the far off horizon where sea and sky meet in mist. Very poetic. So yes, how do we enter this world of presence? And what a beautiful exposition. Now, of course, Brother David is in retreat. Big Sur. He lived there on and off. I think he's in Germany now, but he was there. He's talking about his little garden and his hermitage at that monastic center. It is beautiful. And in Zen, it's a little different. So we recite the 4 great vows. The third vow is Dharma gates are endless. I vow to enter them. So what is a Dharma gate? And I found the best exposition of a Dharma gate was a Zen master talking to his monk. And the monk is saying, I vow to enter these Dharma gates. I have no idea what a Dharma gate is. And the master said, well, do you hear the sound of the stream that's running by our place? And he goes, oh, yes, I do. He said, well, enter there. And so enter into that presence of divinity or relationship, or however you want to think of it, through the 5 senses, what the Dharma gates can be. And as I said, when I'm not hearing the sound of the birds, I know that there's a Dharma gate that I have not seen, or if I'm self-involved and caught up in my stuff, I sometimes even refuse to enter the Dharma gate. So that's the practice. The practice is to be able to be present with everything. And everything is my bad mood, can be my bad mood. Luckily, as I get older, I find my bad moods just so much more amusing. It's like, come on, you're having a hissy fit, just let go. Because I know after 75 years, it's so much nicer to enter that Dharma gate of the bird singing, or that tree that's right there, just ready to make relationship, if I could only be present with that tree. Speaking of trees, my Buddhist name is Myosho, and Myo means wondrous. Wondrous is probably the best explanation. And Sho is pine tree. So when the Roshi gives you your name, usually it's supposed to indicate something about your character or about your practices. So the nun who was overseeing my ordination, she knew what my name was, because I didn't get it till the actual ceremony. And she said, I think you're going to like your name. And you must have really answered that koan well. So one of the koans that the Roshi would give is, how do you realize your true nature when you see the pine tree? So that is how the Roshi worked with most of us. We know that there are 1,400 formal koans, that in Japan, you're going to go through all those koans. Like, what is the Buddha? 3 pounds of flax. What is the essence of the Buddha's teaching? Have you washed your bowls? Is the answer. They're enigmatic. They're not supposed to be answered intellectually. But I think the Roshi felt that we did not have the context of the Buddhist teachings that had come through India, through China, to Japan. So he gave us koans that were more relevant to our lives. One of the first ones he would give to people is, how do you realize God when you're driving your car? Because he he started in LA. The first center was in LA, so there's a lot of car driving in LA. So how are you going to be present as you drive your car? But I appreciated when we were at Mount Baldy, or the Bodhi, where the natural world was the one he used for us, which is, how do you realize the Buddha when you see the full moon? How do you arise your true nature when you see the flower? Things like that. So yes, I've always had a wonderful relationship with trees since my childhood. So I got it. I got how I could manifest a complete relationship with a tree. So how do you manifest a relationship with a tree? Well, the first thing is you can't stay in your human self. Roshi would call it the fixated self. You can't be thinking about, gee, maybe I should get closer to the tree or further from the tree, or should I hug the tree? Or whatever discriminating consciousness is going through your mind. No, as Roshi would say, you just immediately throw your navel at the tree. However you want to think about it. You dissolve the fixated self. Easier said than done, of course. Now, we've been practicing some sense of dissolving in Zazen because you're not manifesting. You're not acting in your human capacity. So you have the opportunity to dissolve the human self momentarily. We can't stay there. Roshi had a great line. You might call that place we go where I think Matthew Fox called it the womb of God. This place where we go to when we dissolve is called the absolute. But he would say, well, you can't stay in the absolute because there are no bathrooms there. There's no restaurants there. How can you stay as a human being in the absolute? So there's this constant in and out, appearing, disappearing, manifesting, dissolving. And what I so appreciated about koan practice was we got this opportunity to manifest, but not to manifest as your personality self. We all have our personalities. We all have our conditioning that we have received. It's very useful in the world, especially if you're not too attached to it. We need discriminating consciousness. It's our vehicle. And I hope as you get older that you enjoy your vehicle more. I do, because it's your vehicle. And hopefully you've banged out some of the dents that you received early on, or whatever you needed to do to work on this vehicle so that it really serves you. So it's not just always trying to trip you up and judge you and be critical and all that. It's simply the vehicle of your spirit, or the vehicle of your true nature, what we call it Buddha nature, which we all have. Spirit, Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it. So in koan practice, you get that opportunity to manifest your pure beingness. But you have to manifest, because sometimes I didn't feel like manifesting. I would go in and I'd be in a sort of a blissful state, quasi samadhi. Oh, isn't this wonderful, Roshi? Let's just sit together and be in samadhi. And he would say, koan? Answer your koan? So I'd have to jump up and do something. Sometimes it wasn't so skillful. And of course, part of my conditioning was to feel ashamed or inadequate if I didn't answer my koan well or skillfully. I would just sort of, he would ring the bell and I would go back. And finally, it must have been like 10 or 15 years, I answered a koan and it was not a good, skillful answer. And I realized it. And I just started laughing. And he looked at me, he's like, okay, finally. Finally, you can be just a little looser about that. So I found koan practice just really a wonderful practice on manifesting from my pure beingness, my manifested Buddha nature. I obviously was not gone. I was not in the absolute where there's no manifestation of beingness at all, which is what mu is. But u is manifestation, which we all have to do. And we are all constantly going in and out all the time. We may not be aware of it, but it's happening. If you read quantum physics, you get an idea of what's going on. But in any case, in our personal life, it's very refreshing to meet the moment that clearly and purely, to see the person in front of you, the tree in front of you, smell the rain. You finally feel at home in the world. In Mary Oliver's words from that wonderful poem, you don't want to be just a visitor to this world. You really want to totally participate. And to me, that means making relationship. So in this question and answer collection of very short sayings of the Roshi, and I quoted a small part of it, I feel that he's really articulated to me of the beautiful way we do come in and out of existence. So I'm going to read, then we can open it for questions and discussion. So, in your own case, how do you know the process of existence? You must manifest the process of existence as it is. If we do not manifest the process of existence as it is, then we are still playing at the intellectual level. And this play at the intellectual never results in rebirth. There is no dissolution at that level. Our rebirth must become a constant, ongoing affair until the moment of our complete disappearance. In any case, until we do disappear from all of this, we have the responsibility to live all of this fully. This means to become reborn in all of this constantly. So, if we live in this way, then, if we live in real relationship with everyone and everything, then we come to understand that death is not a one-time isolated event. It is a complement to the ongoing reborn quality of each moment. So thank you all for the opportunity of sharing my teacher's teachings.
I just spent a week at a Catholic monastery where we were celebrating the Easter holidays. And the monk that was giving us the retreat was so into the reality of Trinity. You're not singular. The Father in relationship to the Son is a love affair, and it results in a Holy Spirit and so on. And the whole orientation of that mystical tradition is that God is found in relationship. Mm-hmm. And even the hermit monks are more in relationship with the world at large because they're always in communication in prayer and holding relationship with all that is. It's so integral to everything. God in relationship.
So I like to do personal retreat at Sky Farm. It's a beautiful hermitage type place. And they have a wonderful library. And so I picked up a book on the Trinity by Richard Rohr. And he was talking so much about the relationship of this Trinity. What he said was you couldn't take any parts of the Trinity out. They were all codependent origination, if you want to put it in Buddhist terms. And that the relationship was the most important part of that, not the individual icons. So he likened it to the atom with the 3 electron, proton, neutron. And the power is only in the relationship. That's it. The power is in the relationship, not in the individual parts.
The other aspect is that one meets the divinity in each person. So in the Christian tradition, you might say you're meeting Christ in every individual who comes to you. Or in the Buddhist, you're meeting original nature, the Buddha, basic goodness in each one. And that's lifelong practice, this reciprocity of love with the other.
Well, and the Roshi also said, you guys, we're doing the easy practice up here. We're making relationship with the moon. Yeah, we are making relationship with the pain in our knees and our hunger, yes. But he says, going down the mountain, that's where the real rubber meets the road. How do you see the Buddha nature in places that are very difficult and harming, maybe feeling harming? How do you find the Buddha nature there?
I was thinking about when you were talking about Roshi, that he passed away, and then there was still a continuous relationship with him in different ways. And I find that for me, in my relationships, there's always this kind of intuition component where it usually leads me back to me in the sense where I need to let go and let go and let go. Maybe it has a little to do with dissolving. I have to say it's quite painful sometimes and uncomfortable.
I know in other traditions, sometimes the word is surrender. When you say let go, you surrender your preferences. But then some people take it into the kind of martyr thing. That's not what it is at all. You do need to honor your vehicle. So you do need to take care of it. You don't give over all the time and give over, surrender. That doesn't work either. But there's always an opportunity. Okay, what am I holding on here that is an obstacle in meeting the moment, whatever that moment is? That is what Roshi calls consciousness. You need to be conscious and aware. I like the word awareness.
Relationship, the way you were describing it, reminded me of the Vietnamese Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh's idea of interbeing, that nothing exists by itself. And everything is so related, and like a piece of paper is connected with water because it came from the tree. So it's connected with rain, it's connected with sunshine, it's connected with the soil, it's connected with so many things. And then we use the sheet of paper. And we don't usually think about all of that, but just holding a piece of paper, and it becomes sacred because it's so interconnected. So that's another way of experiencing relationship. And I loved his walking meditation of when the feet touch the earth, that the feet are kissing the earth. There's this relationship with the body and the earth as we walk. And we're blessing the earth as we walk. That's relationship, sacred relationship.
And very needed now. The earth needs our blessings and our love. And there are certainly indigenous people who feel that our job right now is to send our love to the earth that's hurting. But again, in the complexity of daily life, we don't usually have that opportunity, as Thich Nhat Hanh does with walking meditation. The way he would do it is you would walk that mindful way of kissing the earth, and then he would ring a bell and you would just stop and return to your breath. And then you would continue on with the walking meditation. So these practices are skillful means. That's what the Buddha called them, skillful means. He didn't make a right or wrong, good or bad, skillful and unskillful. So when you mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, I've always been so impressed the way he could meet the worst or most difficult part of humanity. I loved what Mother Teresa called the distressing disguise of God. And he was able to make relationship with some very difficult parts of life. We are fortunate that we may not have to do that, hopefully.
Does your relationship to Roshi maintain over these years? Is it growing, flowering?
So, yes, I hear my teacher's voice sometimes in my being. And I have 40 years of koans to work on. It's really, really wonderful. Roshi was very clear that he wanted the koans to be reflecting what was going on in your life. So if you were ordained, you were training in what is called the officer position. So you get to be the timekeeper, the jikijitsu and the zendo, or the shoji who takes care of the students like a mother. They're the mother and the father. And you're supposed to arise these qualities in you. And then the cook, of course, who's caring for the health of the whole group. And so he knew when you were training, like if I was Tenzo, the cook, my koan would be, how do you realize God when you cook the soup or when you cut the carrots? Or if I was the jikijitsu, how do you realize your Buddha nature when you ring the bell? And so those were so wonderful because they were just very real and present moment. So I had 3 children and I wanted to do retreat when I was pregnant because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do much during the nursing period. So all three of my children sat sesshin with me. And the last one, I took it a little easier because I was 43. That was the one where Roshi gave me the koan that I use all the time, which is, how do you realize the whole world as your own child? So that, for me, is a very profound relationship. That koan comes up all the time. So the koan practice goes on. And he found that women often didn't have a lot of self-confidence in bringing their manifestations of their realizations and their insights out into the world. And he was really encouraging manifestation practice for women, particularly. He said the guys takes it forever to get the principles of true love and cooperation and non-hierarchy. But once they do, they have the confidence to go out there. So I'm working on that. So here I am manifesting, and feels like I'm continuing the Roshi's work that way. He really wanted me to work with women, particularly in manifestation. I do work with young women. I work with a group called Women of Spirit and Faith of 3 generations of women, and we are there to support young women, particularly to get their voice out, to be confident, and mostly their spiritual truths. It's about their spirituality.
Ginny, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
You quoted something. The way is simple. Just refrain from picking and choosing. But we have choices all the time. Would you say something about the meaning of that? Also, you said that you needed to find your feminine. How did you do that? How did you work with that? And then I have one more.
Okay.
You've spoken a few times about practice is to be in relationship with everything. And once you said, including when you're in a bad mood. Could you say something about making relationship with the really difficult and perhaps destructive parts of life when there's particular difficulty or loss?
Okay, well, about the picking and choosing, yes, we do. We pick and choose all the time. So the other part that really helps me with that is to cease to cherish your opinions. So your picking and choosing are your opinions, and that's fine. But to cherish those opinions, holding it to your heart, puts a barrier with presence. So it's not that you don't pick and choose, you're just not cherishing that. You're not, oh, my opinion means so much to me. And then we know what happens when you meet someone whose opinion is different from yours and you're cherishing that opinion. No true relationship is going to happen. Doesn't mean that you have to not have an opinion, but you could say, oh, gee, this person has a different opinion, and his opinion is not going to threaten my self-identity. So we do identify with our opinions, and mostly when we run against people who have different opinions, it's taken as a threat. And that's when your inner missile systems start firing, or at least getting ready to fire. Yeah, fine to have opinions, just hold them lightly.
Gosh, that certainly happens in relationships.
Yeah. So what the second one was?
Oh, you just said once in passing, I think, that you needed to find your feminine. Because the system that you were in involved sitting and very masculine approaches in some ways.
Well, it was called boot camp. They called it boot camp. When you went up to Mount Baldy, you're going to boot camp. I grew up in the 70s, or became an adult, when feminism had a kind of male identification component. We were going to run with the boys. We wanted what the boys had. That's what we were striving for. And what I also understood when I started talking to the other women who actually hung through boot camp was we were all male-identified women. We had very difficult relationships with our mother. My mother was bipolar, and my father was very loving and present. And I was like, well, who wants that? I want what the guys has. But then there came a point where I realized I was definitely holding that opinion pretty closely, and that I needed to find more kindness to my feminine. So that was a long process of healing. I did healing work outside of the Zen Center because this particular spiritual practice, maybe others are better at healing, but I don't think so. I think the Zen master, Robert Aiken, when he found people who had psychological difficulties, he'd say, you need to see a therapist, but don't stop doing your Zen practice. And thank goodness for that Zen practice, because the healing work I went through, which actually included Native American sweat lodge, was part of that, and other things, was very painful. And I had actually learned how to be in relationship with pain through sesshin. So I was able to stick it through. So I was very grateful for, in a way, this boot camp because it gave me some tools that I needed to get through this healing process. And I became a mother. When I was about to be ordained, after 2 children, I unexpectedly got pregnant at 43 with birth control. Very unusual. It was like the universe is saying, hey, you have more work to do. So 3 boys. I thought I would never get ordained because my Roshi was in 90 something at the time. 8 years later, Roshi's still there. And I said, well, I'm ready to be ordained, Roshi. He said, oh, no. If you ask to be ordained, you're going to have another baby. And I said, Roshi, too old. I'm 50 years old at this point. And he looks at me and goes, oh, you retired from being a woman, huh? That was his name for menopause. So yes, I did go through the whole woman thing, and I guess I got retired from being a woman. But I definitely embraced my feminine, sometimes kicking and screaming, but not always. It was a great journey, and it took me, as I said, meeting Guru Mai, and I had to go outside of boot camp to work on that.
In the course of spiritual practice in the school that I'm in, sometimes going outside of the way that things are done, or in my case, going into therapy for a while, when it was time, at just the right time, was life-changing.
Oh.
But it wasn't separate, apart from my practice. It was part of the whole thing. It just didn't involve the specific structure that I was in.
Well, I think it can get a little confused, especially in the West. Right now, people are really coming to Zen centers looking for psychological health, which is not the purpose, really. Ram Dass always says, psychology is about rearranging all that furniture in your mind so, you can be a little more comfortable. Now, spiritual practice is throwing all the furniture out. In some ways, I thought that's a very succinct way of putting it. But there are times you need the furniture, and there are times it is time to throw it out. So as long as we don't get confused, I think they can work together really well. But the psychological part sometimes gets a little confusing for young people, particularly who are coming to Zen Center, who want their psychological pain to be fixed by these practices.
Yeah, well, sometimes, though, we use the practices to throw the chairs all off, but we really haven't dealt with the broken chairs to begin with. And they...
spiritual bypass?
That kind of thing,
That was really big in our sangha because our teacher, who was born in 1907, had no experience of psychology. He didn't really understand it. So they were not encouraged to look at their broken chairs.
So the other question was making relationship with the difficult parts of life.
Well, that's what I say. You need practice. And life will give it to you sometimes. And then what are you going to do with that? Are you going to make a real relationship with disability or pain or health issues that are going on? Are you going to meet it in each moment? I'm so healthy. It's hard for me to sometimes relate to people who have health issues, but I did at Zazen Kai, which is a shorter Zazen, I did sprain my foot. And normally I would have been totally freaked out. How can I teach dance? How can I do this? How can I do that? I have to get to the airport. And then I just said, in this moment, I'm just having to sit Zazen and it's okay. My foot's not bothering me. And in this moment, I'm not teaching dance. I'm just helping in the kitchen. I'm just going to stand there and cut. I'm not going to move around. Oh, and then I'm at the airport. At this moment, I have a sprained foot. I'm just going to walk very slowly and I'm going to get there. So meeting the difficulty in its present moment makes a big difference. And let me tell you that I couldn't do that even 2 years ago. These practices are maturing for me. And I ended up still teaching my dance class with a sprained foot. I did what I could. And I think if we meet the reality and make relationship with the reality of that moment, it's usually not as difficult as what you're building up. It was Thich Nhat Hanh who said, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. How much are you going to hold on to that pain? And that doesn't mean when you lose someone, there isn't any pain, but the suffering is maybe holding on to that pain beyond its reality.
What's the difference between that and grief?
Grief is a process of the pain is living with you. That's grief. But then there comes a time when the pain lessens or when it transmutes into something else. And if you're aware, you can go with it. But if you're holding on tightly to the pain, then the process gets short-circuited. Grief is very real. It's an ongoing process of meeting that pain in its forms that is going to change, transmute.
I just want to thank you. You've said so many things that were so helpful to me personally, including the last part about grief. Thank you.
In our practice, making relationship with each other, when we meet on the path or whatever, is we simply bow. And in that moment, we can disappear. It's a beautiful practice because just by bending the spine and coming into yourself, you get this opportunity to disappear for just a second. And then you're meeting that other person in your Buddha nature, your true nature, the absolute, only for a second, but very refreshing.
Going back to relationship, it also reminds me from the Catholic tradition of Brother Lawrence, who was a French monk. And his job in the monastery was to cook. And he hated cooking. It was like the worst thing for him. And that's what he did, I guess, for years. But he found relationship with God by cutting the carrots and making the soup. I think he said that he found God among the pots and pans in the kitchen.
I don't know if you've heard about that Japanese movie about the man who cleans the public toilets. He became truly present and realized and compassionate in his practice of cleaning the public toilets.
Perfect Days.
Perfect Days. Thank you.
Yeah. Great movie. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's not usually one's most pleasant task is cleaning the toilets. And, that was part of Samu. We had porta potties. In Mount Baldy, we had these 3 porta potties that 40 people had to use in a very short amount of time. And you had to line up. And Mount Baldy, it's not quite as extreme weather now, I guess, with global warming. It was often like 17 degrees with a wind chill factor of about 0. And the snow is blowing and we're all lined up to use the toilet. And Roshi was watching us from his little cabin and he said, that's when I realized that Americans really want the Buddha's teachings. They're standing in line in 0 degrees in the snow. You didn't think the Japanese would do that. And then we also had to clean those toilets. That was part of our practice, samu.
I have found myself distancing from my path, distancing from my practice. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It seems as though it's a time for me to really reevaluate so much about really almost 30 years on the path. It's almost like I am coming home to myself, where I had given too much in terms of identity and all these things that I didn't realize at the time. And so I'm wondering if you've had any experience of backing away to become closer to something different.
Well, I felt like backing away when I spent time with other practices, like the Siddha Yoga practice. Even though I was still going to see the teacher, I was questioning the form, the practices. And I found that really valuable. And also seeing what was skillful and not skillful in the practices and in the whole atmosphere of the sangha organization, however you want to think of it. Just recently, I have not been participating or going to our centers. I was helping out quite a bit. And there's some difficult things that happened. And I said, no, this doesn't feel right to me. So I'm stepping back. Or what I said was, I'm taking a sabbatical. I may be back or I may not. And yes, it does feel valuable to do that because I chose something wasn't right. It wasn't like I was going to swallow it because this is my path. This is my sangha. This doesn't work. I'm stepping back.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I could add something too. My guru used to say that our work was to make the path our own. This is really the work. Once the teacher has left or we've left, I don't think we ever leave the path. It would be a really hard thing to happen. It's like leaving oxygen or something.
Right.
But I do think that there is this maturing that's absolutely necessary in making the path our own.
Thank you for inviting me. It was lovely to be with you all.